All right, Maura, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation and exploring some of the work that you do and also talk about shame, which is never an easy topic, but very necessary just in general. But before we get into it today, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I love talking about health in general, but specifically helping mentally exhausted women overcome overwhelm and how simple and how practical it can be, how quickly things can change for women. And this is based on my own experience of having been through adrenal fatigue twice and using
Mm-hmm.
two very different methods to come through that and what I learned along the way.
Thank you for sharing that. And maybe that's a good opportunity to get into that, like in terms of what was your experience like? Why did you experience that fatigue, if you don't mind walking us through, and what was it like for you?
Yeah, I don't mind at all because I think it's such a common experience. When I tell people that I do this work with mentally exhausted women, they say, "Isn't that everybody?" That sounds like a lot of people to be working with. And it's true. So many women and men too, but I mostly work with women, have this mental exhaustion in part because they have been working with this underlying idea that their worth is connected to their productivity, that just simply having been born is not enough. And when you talked about shame, we talked about this prior to getting on the recording.
Hmm.
I think that is such a driver. And I hadn't really put that piece together, although I explore and reflect on shame in my own personal life. I hadn't really, until you mentioned it, I hadn't really thought about, oh, that is the driver because we have these organizations that are really based on teaching us shame. Our
Hmm.
schools can be, a lot of religions can be, a lot of families have shame kind of
Hmm.
templates. And
Hmm.
we think of it as almost necessary to keep us on the right track or the right path.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I don't think it is necessary. I think that reflection is necessary, but shame can never really be satisfied. As long as
Hmm.
you are holding shame, you are never going to be enough. You're never going to be doing enough.
Hmm.
And you're never going to be living really the life that you deserve to live. I truly believe that everybody's put on here to live a joyful, wonderful, amazing life,
Hmm.
learning lessons along the way, of course, but to live vibrantly is our birthright in my experience
Yeah,
and opinion.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. Now, one of the things you mentioned that for women, whether it's the ones you're working with or in general, there's this sense of wanting to achieve because of the messaging they've received. Where do you think that changed fundamentally? And this is more just of a question, perhaps we can explore further. I think that's become a social issue around the shift of, okay, I need to do more. Whereas I feel personally, and this is just my view, there is enough already, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's where that aspect of shame comes in because you start feeling that nothing's ever enough. So I need to continue to achieve. But there is enough in front of you that perhaps if you were to change your perspective and realize, just to give an example, even as a woman, just being a mother could be enough if you really looked at it that way, right? So maybe you don't need to go out and do more to feel better. It's something you can do, absolutely, you can aspire for, but have certain excuse me, certain boundaries that allow you to feel enough. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think for everybody it's different where it comes from. Where's your primary source of that? I think women in particular have seen generations of the
Hmm.
women that they were raised with, catering to, this
Hmm.
martyrdom, like, I need to give more, I need to give more, I need to
Yeah.
give more, and never showing them, "Hey, I've had enough. Here's how." I try to encourage women to earn their work time.
Mm.
Like, when you wake up in the morning and maybe you get up before your kids, right? Like, the messaging around that is get up before your kids so you can go do a workout or you can blah, blah, blah. I'm like, get up before your kids so you can rest. That's my thing. I like to start the morning with rest. And we think that we can go from this highly activated state in our nervous system to this
Hmm.
calm state just like that. And
Yeah.
that we should just be able to flip a switch on off. But that's not really good for us. Even if it was possible, it's not really good for us to
Hmm.
do.
Yeah.
I think obviously there's a lot of financial incentive. Buy the product, buy the biohack, buy the course, buy the whatever. And I have a course. I don't think
Yeah.
that there's anything wrong with selling things inherently, but I think the path out is not the path that got you in to
Hmm.
that. So doing
Hmm.
more to get out of mental exhaustion is not going to lead you out. So
Right.
we have a huge biohacking community. I was quote unquote biohacking before it was even a term. That's what I was trying to do my first time that I went through adrenal fatigue, and it landed me right into absolute complete burnout.
Mm.
And everything I had been trying to keep in the air and hold together had to fall apart. And some of it came back together later, some of it didn't, but it definitely didn't work so hard. And I think
Hmm.
the reason that I thought that it would was because of messaging from my family, from, I think, honestly, this might be an unpopular opinion, but the dark side of feminism is
Hmm.
telling us that we are not enough,
Hmm.
that feminism isn't really about being feminine at all. It's
Hmm.
about getting you in the workforce, competing with men. Like, I'm happy. Honestly, there are good things about it. When I needed to buy my
Yeah.
own house, I'm glad that I was able to do that without my dad
Right.
co-signing for me and things like
Yeah.
that. But it has taken a dark side, a dark turn where
Right.
it puts us in competition and it blinds us to the way that we are creating our own overwhelm.
Mm.
And some of the solutions to that are just so practical. And the
Hmm.
work is the nervous system work, like becoming comfortable of with stepping out of that old patterning. I have an example if you don't mind me
Sure.
sharing. So I'm divorced, I'm dating. I went on this date. It was a lunch date, and the area of town that we met in had old fashioned meters with coins,
Hmm.
like parking meters. And I didn't have enough change. I had cash on me.
Right.
So as we were sitting down, I told my date, hang on, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get change to pay my meter. And he said, I'll do that for you. And old me, like before I went through all of this development work, would have been like, no, I'll do it. You don't need
Hmm.
to. It would have been like this
Hmm.
little like argument.
Yeah.
But I was like really being conscious about my patterning. And I was like, okay.
Hmm.
And he got up and he took care of it. And I sat there and I just felt my nervous system like I didn't realize it was like gearing up for that argument.
Yep.
And just letting this person do something really nice for me was just like a whole different experience. Like I actually got full body tingles just being like, oh, I get to just sit here and take a few deep breaths and decide what I'm going to have for lunch. And then I felt really special too. And I was like, wow, how often have I been blocking this exact experience
Hmm.
because of this underlying little nugget of shame that says, oh, he shouldn't have to do that for me. And then on top of that, blocking that connection where he like felt good about having done
Hmm.
something really thoughtful for me. And I think that we do this over and over again. And of course, it adds up to a lot of overwhelm.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think what I'm hearing there is, again, that internal messaging of I can do things for myself. And if someone is doing something, that means I'm not capable of it. And I think that's what you're talking about, even the darker side of feminism. That yes, there's great things, like you said, you're able to provide for yourself, but that often comes at a cost. And I'm wondering biologically too, if there's an aspect of it where there's certain I fundamentally believe that men and women bring different skills and strengths to the table, and you need to be able to work with those, right? And it doesn't mean that one is less than the other, but in your example that you shared, this gentleman decided to help you in a way that is okay, and you were able to accept it without making a thing out of it. right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge issue too nowadays.
Yes, I have come to 100% agree. And I grew up in a very feminist household
Hmm.
and totally just was missing, completely like going over my head. So many opportunities
Hmm.
where the exact thing I was saying I wanted or needed was being offered to me and I was shutting it down. Like in that moment, I was being seen.
Hmm.
And how many of us say we want to be seen? Like that is
Right.
such a fundamental need. And I just have to laugh at myself and give myself grace about it because I spent like 40 years
Hmm.
just being like, no, don't see me, but I want to be
Right.
seen. But
Right. Yeah.
and yeah, and I think that really does hurt both the relationships for both men
Hmm.
and for women.
Hmm.
And for example, I have a woman in my community who shared after just 3 weeks, she hadn't even been in for an entire month. She said, my marriage is getting better. I
Mm.
had no idea that I had these habits that were really hurting my relationship. And that's
Hmm.
not something I advertise, but it makes sense to me that would happen as you learn how to embrace your worthiness, your value,
Hmm.
and take space and take time for yourself because nobody can really give that to you if
Right.
you won't take it.
Hmm.
And I do see a lot of women just as soon as there's a little space on their plate, they fill it up with something else because
Hmm.
of that drive that they've conditioned their nervous system to not even be able to rest when they have the time
Hmm.
to rest. And
Yeah.
and it's harder is better, more is better. And it's not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. No, and I was talking about that recently in one of our like the groups I facilitate in. There's this idea of busyness and trying to stay busy so then things feel good. But I think, as we've talked about, the wanting to stay busy is often a way of not sitting with the discomfort that we all experience when we have to connect with ourselves, because that can often bring up a lot of feelings of shame as well, and
Yeah.
especially around everything we've talked about. And then the other thing you mentioned was divorce, and that's something I've experienced too. And there's a lot of shame associated with that too. So,
Yeah.
any thoughts around that? Because I know you and I chatted about that as well, and that can often present a lot of challenges for people where they're not comfortable talking about it or sharing it or just even coming out of it and then having to start over again in a way.
Yeah.
And often people and I don't, not saying this is what everyone does, but I know for me, I for the longest time internalized it as failure, that I had
Mm.
failed. And that was very tough for me because that was the first time I had looked at something as failure in my life. So I had to really reframe it and navigate that. And now looking back, it was a beautiful opportunity for me to grow and pivot in life. And it's allowed me to become a different person just through the experience of all of it. Curious to hear your experience with it.
Yeah. I had the same thing. Like, I know that, oh, you're getting me deep. I know that that feminist messaging that I had
Hmm.
led me into the relationship that I was in. And it was actually by many, it
Yeah.
was, there was something internal where I was just like, I know I can have a little bit better. And I did. And when I started to uncouple this shame and this productivity and this, and I started to change a lot, he just couldn't come with me. And so we're still connected. We still parent our children, mother, I don't like the term parent, but mother and father our children really
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
and work together. And there is there is like a connection. We're still going to be life partners
Hmm.
because we have two sons together.
Hmm.
But I don't think that I could be where I am now if I had stayed in that relationship. And the dissolving of it did help me
Right.
grow. It did
Hmm.
change me a lot. And I was reflecting on that a lot today. And then moving into new relationships, like trying to let go of that old stuff and the fears of repeating the same things. Yeah, it's really made me question my stories and
Hmm.
question the kind of assumptions. And
Right.
yeah, shame is absolutely a part of it. And but also just knowing that I was just looking for something different and there's nothing to be ashamed of because he was just
Mm-hmm.
approaching it in a different but also wonderful way to approach marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We just weren't on the same page with it.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky and I feel very blessed
Mm-hmm.
in my situation and in the way it's panned out for my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to reflect on some of those things and look at internally, because a lot of times it's easier to just say it's just the other person, right? Like even you can easily justify it saying, I wanted to grow, he didn't want to grow, so here I am. But
Mhm.
to really look at yourself and say, okay, what are some of the things I can learn from this? Where was I falling short, or where are there areas for improvement? And how can I use this experience to do something different as I move forward? So again, that requires a lot of courage. The
Yeah.
other piece you touched on was the biohacking, and one of the things I've come to understand, at least in the wellness community, they tend to refrain from using the term biohacking because it implies that, well, you're figuring out a way of hacking something that doesn't exist. But the perspective there is, well, a lot of these things that are being practiced or preached are essentially things that we should be doing in general. So there's
Yeah.
no real hacking there. But you referred to it as also where it led to that fatigue. So I'm just curious to understand how all of that unfolded.
Yeah. So for me, the first time I had adrenal fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
I had already been in the natural health space for close to a decade. So
Mm-hmm.
I had access to the supplements in the digestive system and understood so many things. I had chiropractors upon chiropractors that I had access to. I was really well connected and trying to pull from all of those resources, and everybody had a different answer. And
Mm-hmm.
I was essentially pill for an illing myself, but with supplements and workouts and looking for the food that I didn't know I had an intolerance to. And
Mm-hmm.
it's all this very left brain, work it, 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 which,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, got me there in the first place, like
Right.
the overthinking and the planning and all of the stuff. But I was just thinking, if I just try one more thing, this is going to be the answer. One more thing, this is going to be the answer. And that patterning in itself
Mm-hmm.
was an avoidance of looking at what was actually creating the overwhelm
Mm-hmm.
in the first place. The doing too much, the at the time I had a full-time job, I was trying to cram into a part-time schedule and be home with my kids part most of the time, and just essentially having two at least full-time jobs I was trying to cram into my one life.
Yeah.
And again, not thinking like, not realizing it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could summarize just quickly this, what I did the second time when I woke up with another panic attack, this was years later, and realized, oh my gosh, I'm in adrenal fatigue again. I really got honest with myself about what didn't work that first time around. And while I, of course, think hydration and nutrition and time outside and movement and all those things are important to your body,
Mm-hmm.
the second time around, I decided to think maybe my body's not broken. Maybe it's actually guiding me somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know when I decided I was only going to take supplements when I felt like it, when my body said, and my intuition or my whatever said, yeah, go take that. If I
Yeah.
remembered, I was going to guilt or shame myself or like stress that I was
Mm-hmm.
never going to wake up again or something. I wasn't going to become the sick mom. I was just going to let go of all of those stories and all of those fears and just follow my body for a while and see where that led
Mm-hmm.
me. And I think I committed to just doing it for a month. Let's see what happens
Mm-hmm.
at the end of a month. I can always change course.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a whole month before I was like, wow, I feel really so much better. It
Mm.
was just, and it really was my body's request for rest and
Yeah.
like getting used to being able to do that and getting used to letting go of, oh, but the dishes aren't done. And really, I saw some dust on the floor and we need to Martha Stewart this place up.
Yeah.
And just being like, it's okay. My kids are going to live if I haven't vacuumed in a
Yeah.
week or two. Just
Yeah.
checking myself and laughing at myself at all the ways that I had just been putting myself into this overdrive. That was the path out. And so just teaching women just really practical things like when you're driving, oh, we have these supercomputers in our pockets and we get them out all the time. And we didn't have that 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
When you got to a stoplight, you would just sit there. You might change the
Hmm.
radio or talk to the person or just sit there. And I just started just sitting there and
Yeah.
like consciously letting my brain, I think of it as brain melting. Like
Yeah.
I don't need to think about or solve anything or answer anyone for these 2 minutes. And oh my gosh, it made such a difference.
Yeah.
And it's such a simple, practical thing that didn't take any more time out of my day. I didn't
Hmm.
need to spend an hour in the sauna or get up at 5 a.m. to see just the perfect sunlight or whatever. That's the thing that I get like all up in arms about with the quote unquote biohacking. Yes, sunlight is important, fresh air is important,
Hmm.
but you don't need to just go do it. Just go do it
Right.
in a way that works for you and don't worry about listening to a 3-hour podcast about to learn how
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing from you there's it doesn't have to be so rigid. You can find a healthy balance with it. And then everything you've shared around there again is that discomfort of just sitting with yourself,
Mhm.
and a lot of that busyness or try that drive or trying to get all these things, it's never enough if we haven't been able to connect with ourselves. And I see this a lot, and I use the term addiction loosely here because it's fairly broad, and I truly believe we all become susceptible to it in some shape or form because it is how our brain gets wired, and we tend to look for things outside of ourselves to find that sense of fulfillment. And until we're not able to find it within ourselves, we'll always be looking outside. And
Yeah.
it's accumulation. And people struggle with it in different ways. Again, there's the substance abuse side of it, but then I've seen it in terms of achievements and doing things and trying to accomplish things. It could show up in so many different ways, and it all manifests itself as a disease in a way. But
Mhm.
ultimately, it's finding that ability to connect with ourselves. And you touched on the cell phone thing too, where, now it's if you have to wait or sit somewhere immediately, that's what we all do. And trying to figure out what's going on, right? And always being on top of things. But that's interesting. And then the other piece you mentioned was the burnout piece. And burnout often just shows up and you realize that, oh, now I'm experiencing this. Whereas there are certain signs that you can notice earlier. In your case, just curious to understand what were some of those early signs you, I'm assuming, ignored them, and then how did it show up as full burnout?
Yeah. Well, I think this ties into kind of what you were saying about addiction. One of the first real like whoa moments that I had was during the rough patch that ultimately led to the end of my marriage. And I remember
Hmm.
one day I was walking to pick up my son from school. And on the way, I was just like, oh my gosh, I want all the sugar, all the gluten, all the dairy, all the alcohol, all the drugs. I don't have any history with addiction of any substance. Well, sugar probably, but I was like, wait a minute, that's not me. What is actually going on here? And I was like, oh, the common thing between all of those is that they're numbing.
Hmm.
They would help me numb. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm obviously going on and maybe not fully connected
Yeah.
with the feelings that I'm having right now. And at that point, I could make a choice to switch over to something else.
Hmm.
And for me, sometimes it's a bath or journaling or just taking time to have a really big cleansing cry. It doesn't have to get fancy. It doesn't have to get elaborate. I don't have to light sage and candles and incense and all of the things.
Yeah.
You can if you love those, but sometimes you could just close the door and just weep your heart out if you can. And it just, yeah, there was definitely a lot of ignoring signs. And some
Hmm.
signs that I talk to women about are letting piles of stuff accumulate in your house, like piles of
Yeah.
dishes, piles of mail, piles of laundry. And then it creates this cycle of, okay, the pile itself is overwhelming. And the pile came from overwhelm. And
Yeah.
just noticing, oh, this is a sign. It doesn't have to be a judgment one way or the other, But sometimes when you just admit, oh, I'm having overwhelm right now, and
Hmm.
I can see it in this pile. Not being able to find time for coffee dates with your girlfriends or a date with your partner, like that, just
Hmm.
something always breaks down and you're not able to get out for that fun break. Getting up and not getting dressed. So many of us can work from home,
Hmm.
or if you
Right.
run your kids to the school or whatever, and you never change out of whatever you slept in, or you just put on like
Mm.
whatever was on the floor rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
taking time to dress yourself and
Mm.
to. Speaking of shame, I have a funny story. My older son is probably going to be an engineer. So they have a
Yeah.
very certain way of thinking. And I used to have even shorter hair than this. I had a
Mhm.
pixie for most of his life where I just got up, wet it down, and walked out. And now that my hair is curly, it takes a long time sometimes to work on it. And I had said something to him about, oh, if I do such and such, my hair will get like messy and I have to start all over again. And he goes, if you didn't spend an hour in your hair every day, it wouldn't matter. And
Yeah.
I'm like, before that might have wrecked me, but oh my gosh, I spent so much time on my hair. How indulgent, how wrong of me. And I was just like, yep, I do that because I like it. And like
Mhm.
to be able to own it and claim it was something that was just, and to just be like, yeah, I'm worth a clean pair of clothes. I'm worth a good scrubbing
Mm.
down every day and teeth brush
Yeah.
and a little makeup if I want. It's just these things that are just spending. Another example would be like spending a lot of time scrolling. When it comes right down
Mm.
to it, social media is super boring. Like looking at other people's lives
Mhm.
from the outside, we have a term for that in the like kink space. And I'm not in
Yeah.
kink space, but I don't know if you're but watching somebody else enjoy their life and
Yeah.
enjoy something is not the same as enjoying it yourself.
Mm.
And embrace it. Turn off your
Mhm.
phone, put it down, go play a game with your kids, go flirt with your partner. I tell people that all the time. Go
Mhm.
flirt with your partner. Like today,
Yeah.
every day, you're going to take some time and connect.
Mhm.
And
Right.
how much better will your life become when you stop the doom scrolling and the Netflix binge and you like go slap him in the butt or something?
Yeah. I think to your point, that's again, it ultimately comes back to how fundamental is the connection you have with yourself. And if you're not fully connected with yourself, you're again seeking it or trying to find it in other ways, but it has the opposite effect. So if you're going to be scrolling on social media and looking at other people's lives or what they're doing and what they're saying and how their lives are that much greater, again, it's all behind a screen. We don't know what happens in real life. So you're
It's a
again
literal and a
creating.
metaphorical screen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's it. You're just creating ways for yourself to feel bad, right? And we don't necessarily recognize that until we're willing to really pull ourselves back and have a higher resolution view of what are these behaviors I'm engaging in, right?
Mm,
Almost observing yourself and watching it all play out. And it's like you're watching yourself in a movie, and then you can truly appreciate and understand, okay, I don't feel good about myself. So I'm just doing engaging in these behaviors that are just circular in nature. And
mhm,
it's just that short-term relief leads to a longer term consequence, and often it's just more pain and suffering. So I
for sure.
appreciate that. Now we've talked about all the ways shame shows up and some of the behaviors we engage in to avoid it and run from it or disguise it, but ultimately there's a way out. And I'm curious, I know you've shared some practical tips, but what are some other things people can do? And I know you specifically work with women, but I think a lot of it can also apply to men. But I'm just curious to understand, what are some ways people can avoid falling into these traps from your perspective? Hmm.
To change their mindset. Like we talked about uncoupling productivity. We talked about the difference between men and women, like
Yeah.
embracing and learning what that is. What does
Mm.
that look like? What is femininity? Because it's
Hmm.
not shown to us in
Mm.
in our culture. It's not on our show. It's not in our celebrities or the people that we
Yeah.
see presented to us as like women to look up to. Most of them really are not feminine at all. I think that there's a growing movement of people who are working in this, that I say that to say like people are going to be coming into contact with this information more and more. But we all have a balance of that kind of flow state and like
Yeah.
that underlying worthiness,
Mm-hmm.
value, self-value,
Mm-hmm.
and the piece that helps us structure in and hold to that. That's like the unstructured and the structured pieces of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and using both together. For example, one of the first things that I did was create a routine for myself every Sunday, because what I was doing is I was using like self-care as triage, and like
Mm.
when things were really hard, we'd had a fight or the kids were really cranky or whatever, didn't go my way, then I would take care of myself. But
Mm.
I didn't really know what to choose or what worked, and maybe I didn't have the things on hand that I wanted, and it was just a mess. When I decided, no, I'm actually just going to regularly schedule this every Sunday night, I started taking a self-care bath.
Mm.
And it didn't matter if I had a rough week or a not rough week. It just made a huge difference. And then if I needed a bath in the middle, I knew exactly what to do. I
Right.
knew it was a no-brainer, and it was really easy access
Mm-hmm.
to taking care of myself.
Yeah.
And those but so there was both pieces, like being connected with what feels good for me, what makes me feel better,
Right.
as well as what, like having the structure of every day, this is planned
Mm-hmm.
out. And I still actually do this. It's been 7 or 8 years since I started
Yeah.
doing this, and my kids know Sunday night is mom's self-care night, and they
Mm-hmm.
are just on their own after dinner. They're old enough
You're
to
right.
be on their own. And my friends know, don't expect me to respond to any texts or phone calls unless it's emergency, because that's
Mm-hmm.
my night for me. And having those pieces together working in harmony just makes all of the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also talk about working with your body so that you're not trying to, say, stimulate your own detox when it's actually not your body's time to stimulate detox.
Mm-hmm.
Like that will create exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas just moving the timing of when you're drinking a tea, for example,
Right.
will change how your body responds to that and how much energy you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you because that's something I've had to focus on too. It's the preventative side, right? So
Mhm.
both for my mental and physical health. As I've gotten older, I've had to be more preventative with self care when it comes to my body,
Mhm.
because before it was like you respond if you're experiencing injuries. Now I'm like, no, if I need to be able to do a lot of the things I still do, I need to take care of myself and be more preventative. And it's the same with my mental health. It's not waiting for things to really fall apart and then you book a meeting with your therapist. It's
Mhm.
going preventively. And for me, it's just evolved more into making sure I'm journaling on a regular basis. I'm meditating. I'm doing all the things that help me keep things in check rather than waiting for the chaos to happen and then get
Right.
all reactive. And that doesn't work in the long run anyway. So I definitely appreciate that. But yeah.
I read this book by this author named Laura Doyle. She's got some relationship books that
Hmm.
I read as part of my own healing. They were really wonderful. But one of the things that she says in one of those books is she reframes self care, because I used to think going to the gym was self care because it's supposed to give you the energy, blah, 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 blah. I actually hate going to the gym. So she had a reframe where she said self care has to have three things to qualify for true self care. It needs to leave you feeling good after you're done, feel good
Hmm.
while doing it, and be something that nobody else can do for you. So
Hmm.
the fact that I don't like going to the gym, I may still go to the gym, but it doesn't count as my self-care, my daily
Right.
self-care. And I think that so many of us are just like, especially women, will be like, doing the dishes was my self-care because I like having a clean kitchen. It doesn't feel good to do dishes usually, and somebody else
Hmm.
could do that for you. So you can do the dishes and enjoy the clean kitchen, but don't count it as your self-care. You still need to take the bath or go dancing or go whatever
Right.
it is that does feel good, that does really light you up. There needs to be
Hmm.
space in each day and each week for that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that reframe. And another reframe I would add, because I think a lot of people, again, that are stuck in shame struggle with this, but the feeling selfish versus the
Mm,
self-care piece, right?
yes.
And I think it's just understanding if you're not filling your cup first, then you don't have the capacity to fill other people's cups. And a lot of people get stuck in, oh, if I'm doing this for myself, it's selfish and I should be like providing and nurturing and supporting everyone else in my life. But it's, well, no, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not doing that self-care, you won't have much capacity to do anything else for others. And I think as parents, a lot of us get stuck in that too. And
Yeah.
I've really had to reframe that. If I'm not at my best, then I can't be a good father. I can't
Yes.
be
Yes.
available emotionally or physically for my son. And that takes a lot of navigating for people because, again, to your point earlier, culturally or socially, we get conditioned that a lot of these things are selfish and we have to be selfless and always be there and present. And taking that time is, a lot of people feel guilty when they do take
Yeah.
that time for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, again, just so unnecessary. Like, my house isn't any cleaner. My dishes aren't any cleaner if I did it from that self sacrificing martyrdom place,
Yes.
as if I did it from a place of I'm rested and I think I'm doing that from a place where I'm honoring and devoted to this wonderful life. And honestly, cleaning when I'm coming to it from that place, but I
Yes.
literally had to realize that sometimes I was cleaning, I was getting angry in order to clean. And it was so unnecessary and a waste of energy. And I'm laughing because there was a woman in our group who, one of my very practical, like, finding stolen moments. Like, I talk
Mm-hmm.
about that. If you're doing dishes and it's taking hours and hours, of course that's going to drive you crazy. I'm like, what if you spent 10 or 15 minutes soaking those dishes, went and did something fun for 10 or 15
Mm-hmm.
minutes and came back? And she said, I was convinced this was not going to work. And she's
Mm-hmm.
like, but it totally worked. It was so much easier to do those dishes. I'm like, and you got to do something fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully you spent the time doing that. But it's like these little just shifting around, not only will those dishes get just as clean, but like you're in a better mood. Or if you even just put on some music or like little things that help lighten the mood, bring your own joy. You are entitled to as much joy and vibrancy as you can handle
Mm-hmm.
in a given
Yeah,
moment.
for sure. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was this reframing of and going back to understanding the roles men and women play and really accepting that. But I see a lot of resistance to that because socially and culturally, we've been told that's not good enough, right? Like,
Mhm.
especially if we just focus on women, that what you've been doing isn't good enough. You need to go now compete with men. And there could be a lot of resistance because if that's all you know, if that's how you've been conditioned. So, what are your thoughts around breaking away from that and really shifting that perspective or reframing it and fully accepting that, okay, this doesn't have to be my drive or my aspiration to compete. Just be comfortable and okay with how I am.
Yeah. I think you said it just really perfectly. And that just simple phrase, being comfortable with who I am, how I
Mm-hmm.
am. For me, when I started to come into this concept, I had to admit, and it was coupled with shame, that I had just this deep desire
Mm-hmm.
for rest and for receiving providership, receiving protection, and it had been co-opted. There had been just this layer of
Mm-hmm.
not only shame about it, but just disbelief that it
Mm-hmm.
could happen, that anybody would want to do that. It was
Mm-hmm.
obviously not something modeled in my family. And so I really had no frame of reference. And it was a shock to me to be like, wait, men like that? They like
Mm-hmm.
want to do that? And so I really didn't understand men at all. I'm not saying I still do, but at least I have this space to be like, this person is different than me and wants and enjoys things that I would never even imagine. I
Mm-hmm.
never would imagine somebody want to pay my meter and feel really good about paying my parking meter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's made dating, it's made all of it so much more fun. And
Mm,
so, in a lot of ways, easier to be able to determine like somebody who's meeting, knowing that somebody could meet those things and could feel good
mhm,
about that. Let me let go of the shame of
mhm.
wanting that and feeling, oh, that would be really nourishing for me. And I think, yeah, that was just a game changer. Just learning that this is one of the ways that men and women are different. And it's so perfectly designed to go together.
Right.
It's just really beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you is, like, having that level of openness and accepting of however it comes up, but being aware of the triggers, right? Like you shared in that example, there were certain triggers that were coming up, but being curious with yourself, because a lot of the times what we tend to do is we project those triggers onto the other person. That this person is doing this is their motive, this is their intention, and we create this whole story in our head. But and this is obviously requires a lot of effort and practice, but really getting curious with yourself and understanding, why am I getting so triggered? What's coming up
Mhm.
here? Where are my beliefs being challenged? What are my patterns that are holding me back? As you shared, being aware of those patterns too. But that's the beauty of it, of going through all of these experiences and opportunities, because you get to learn so much about yourself. And going beyond even having that level of acceptance, what I'm hearing from you is you started to realize where you didn't feel comfortable, even though you felt, okay, I've been conditioned to be this way, but it just doesn't feel good or doesn't feel right. And you use that as a way of exploring further.
Yeah, I really love Kelly Brogan. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but
No.
she has several podcasts on this topic. And one of the things that she says, I think is just so succinctly put together, is that there is no amount of following that feminist, doing, competing, driving that will get you the rest and the love that you are craving. And
Mm-hmm.
not saying that there's not a place for it. I obviously have a business myself,
Mm-hmm.
but in corporate America, it's not in the career. And I work with some women intensely one
Mm-hmm.
on one. Sometimes people will hire me for that. And I've had women literally tell me, I feel cheated. I believed and focused on my career, and now it's too late for me to get what I really wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
it just breaks my heart to know that happened, and how many people and families, because this can hurt families too. When
Mm-hmm.
you're, like I said, when you're in that space of not understanding what's being offered to you by this, if you have a partner who loves you and you can be creating a divide in your
Mm-hmm.
relationship, a divide in your family. You're not necessarily as strong because you're not being honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're not being honest in the relationship then,
Yeah.
and you're not able to work together towards a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, I'm looking forward to the shift to the awareness. And it's not so much a going back to, because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that we ever had it great and perfectly, like really
Right.
dialed in. And I
Mm-hmm.
think now we can, like, now in my awareness, I can be doing my work and like
Yeah.
doing the promotion and all of the things that are like, I actually enjoy it. There's part of me that enjoys that. And then I can turn
Mm-hmm.
off and
Right.
go into the evening and make space for the part of me that loves dancing, loves taking a bath, isn't going to do anything she doesn't feel like doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that fullness and having access to that fullness has just brought a new light to my life. When I first started really tapping into some of these things, I was blissed out for 6 weeks, especially the dancing, because I was learning, like, it's partner dancing. So I had to learn to not lead. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even realize I was doing that. I had to
Yeah.
learn to listen with my body. And my
Mm-hmm.
nervous system had to adjust and not be always anticipating, what does he want me to do? What's going on? And then also
Mm-hmm.
just letting that person be a great lead or a not great lead. Like they're on
Mm-hmm.
their journey too. And just really listening. Something happened. Like I said, 6 weeks, nothing could get me down. My kids are fighting. You guys are great. And being
Yeah.
able to find your thing, not everybody's is dancing, but your thing that makes you feel that way, and put it on the calendar. Treat it
Mm-hmm.
as important as a doctor's appointment or a church or whatever you do every single week. is like where both pieces come in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And just on that corporate side, I want to add, because I think it also, I know you used the example of women, but it also applies to men. Because I think for me too, and I've shared this before, when I was trying to achieve all these titles in the corporate world, and then I started, especially when I became a father, I started looking at some of these men specifically that I was wanting to be like, or I was looking up to. And one of the common themes that I started to see, and this doesn't apply in all cases, but they didn't have great relationships with their
Mhm.
children or relationships in general. And I started asking, like, is that what I really want? And now for me, the importance is being, yeah, of course, I need to work because
Mhm.
that's what allows me to pay the bills, but it's a job. It's not a career or a purpose in life, because the purpose in life for me is being at home with my family and being emotionally and physically present and
Yeah.
being there for them, rather than worrying about getting this email out or this meeting or traveling or whatever it is that takes us away from our families. So that's definitely been a shift for me as well. And I think it can apply to both men and women, and realizing the value of your family at the end of the day versus
Yeah.
your work family that you get told is so important. And I've
Right.
heard recently that, again, it's the conditioning that takes place where they talk about, oh, we're a family here at the workplace. And
But
yeah,
where are they when you need them later in life? They're not really.
exactly.
Then you find out they're not actually really your family. And I'm just
Yeah,
smiling hearing that there is that counterpart happening because,
yeah,
as I mentioned, I don't think we ever really understood that. We like have generations upon generations
yeah,
of men that were like not in the home because they were providing, or men that
yeah,
were not emotionally connected because they had their own stuff going
yeah,
on. And we're just, I think, at a really exciting place where we
yeah.
have both a significant and number of men and women who are stepping to the table and saying,
Yeah.
we can take the best pieces and put it
Mhm.
together to have something that we've never had before,
Right. Yeah.
personally and
I
culturally.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have obviously a responsibility to provide, but if I'm not home because I'm trying to provide, then I'm not really serving a role either, right? Because that
Right.
I'm not present. So there's a fine balance, like everything we've talked about. And I know we've covered a lot, but I do want to just double check if there's anything else you wanted to add that would be of value to the listeners, perhaps something we haven't covered yet.
I just want to underline for women just this message of hope that
Mhm.
feeling better is closer than you think, that
Mhm.
you don't have to wait for weeks or months to notice the changes of the things that work, the things that are really getting to the heart of why you're having this mental exhaustion, this overwhelm. You will notice a difference really quickly. And it has to be paired. Like a lot of women have been given diagnoses that their bodies are attacking them, or,
Mhm.
and I would just encourage you to really question that because it's not in your body's best interest to attack itself,
Mhm.
but maybe there's something else going on that we
Mhm.
have been in this format of body for hundreds of thousands of years. And does it really make sense that suddenly we're attacking ourselves?
Right.
No, what is really going on, it's could be our understanding. And
Mhm.
like I said, a fundamental shift was like, maybe my body's not wrong, maybe it's asking me to listen.
Right.
And it might be coming out in something in the thyroid or something in the adrenals or something, but again, there's a message within that. Having both pieces, the best thyroid supplement, medication, whatever in the world is not going to really make that much difference if you still have the underlying patterns and messaging to yourself that is
Mhm.
causing your thyroid to react in that way in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, you pick where you want to start. If you want to start light and do the basics and then see how far that gets you, I've seen wonderful things happen. I worked with a woman who had a laundry list of autoimmune diagnoses and she was spending thousands of dollars just on diagnostics.
Mhm.
And when I looked at her symptoms, I was like, how much water are you drinking? Because she
Mhm.
had, of course, buckets of supplements to take. She's trying to treat it naturally. She was drinking less than a liter of water a day.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, do whatever you want with those supplements, but let's focus on the water. And
Yeah.
once she even got above the liter a day, she was like,
Mhm.
wow, I'm feeling a lot better than because the body can't do anything without that water.
Right. Yeah.
So starting with the basics sometimes can be a great
Mhm.
place to start. It doesn't have to be hard, deep dive, headfirst in the deep end of the pool. It can be just starting to be like, I have enough value in myself that I'm going to drink water and I'm
Right.
going to eat my 3 meals and I'm going
Hmm.
to sleep. Just
Yeah.
those little things make a huge difference.
Yeah. And our bodies are like beautifully designed. And to your point, they're not meant to attack us. I think it's really the mind that attacks us. And when we're in that fight or flight
Yeah.
constantly, then our bodies, unfortunately, dedicating all the resources to respond to those made up threats.
Yeah.
And that's where we start suffering. But to your point, we can look at it more as a message rather than saying things are falling apart. So I do
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you so much, Maura,
Sure.
for all your insight and wisdom today. But for listeners that want to get a hold of you or find your work, what are some ways they can do that?
I have an online course and community for mentally exhausted women and really stepping them through those kind of basics of shifting the mind, finding stolen moments, learning to work with their body's natural rhythms. And then we have a community that goes along with that as well, where we do monthly integrations because it's one thing to listen to a course and check the boxes. This video is done, that video is done, and never apply it. Each month we have an integration that's either directly from the course or something added onto it. And sometimes we get real serious with those, a real deep dive. Sometimes we do something fun like making a Pinterest board,
Yeah.
and that's your month. So we try to mix it up. We support each other, share our wins, questions, all of those kinds of things. Just having those two pieces together. And that's at thevibrantway.com. And then I also have a workshop on why you don't need complicated self care to overcome overwhelm. And we've covered some of the topics and points during this podcast. So if you want to hear more, you can get that as well. And that's just like a one time $7. And
Awesome.
and then yeah, you'll create your own first what I call replenishing rhythm from that workshop.
Amazing. We'll put that in the show notes so people can access it or see it. But thank you again, Maura, for coming on and sharing your story with us and having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you too. This has been really fun.